So has Russia's war in Ukraine just spread to Africa? A diplomatic war of words is well underway. Moscow is accusing Kyiv of opening up, quote, a second front in Mali. This after Bamako broke off diplomatic relations with Ukraine on Sunday. It was in the wake of a rebel attack in the north of the country that left dozens of Malian soldiers and Russian Wagner mercenaries dead. Analysts say the attack is one of the group's most deadly defeats in Africa. Niger has since followed suit and also capped diplomatic ties with Kyiv. Now, the official response from Bamako was swift and direct, accusing Kyiv of supporting terrorist groups on Mali's soil.
The transitional government of the Republic of Mali has learned with deep astonishment of the subversive remarks by which Mr. Andrei Yusov from the Ukrainian Military Intelligence Agency admitted the involvement of Ukraine in a cowardly attack on the Malian defense and security forces in Tinzaouaten, as well as causing property damage. These allegations are extremely serious, having been neither denied nor condemned by the Ukrainian authorities, showing clearly official support of the Ukrainian government for terrorism in Africa, the Sahel, and more specifically in Mali.
Right. In Moscow, in the shadow of the Kremlin, dozens of Russians came to mourn the fallen Wagner fighters. The group says its mercenaries and Malian soldiers took heavy losses in clashes with Tuaregs and Islamist fighters from an Al-Qaeda affiliate. The Tuaregs said they had killed 84 Russian Wagner mercenaries and 47 Malian soldiers during fierce battles in late July. Then in Nigeria, at least 90 people are behind bars after images emerged of people waving Russian flags at protests against economic hardship in Kano State. Now, soon after, Russian flags were seen at rallies in the capital, Abuja. DW's Christine Mhundwa reports from Lagos.
Dozens of demonstrators have been arrested for carrying Russian flags at protests against economic hardship here in Nigeria. Some of the protesters were heard calling for a military takeover and for Russia's President Vladimir Putin to help bring regime change here in Nigeria. The Russian embassy promptly released a statement denying any involvement. Nigeria's domestic security agency said it had also detained people who were sewing the flags. The top security official, General Christopher Musa, said the flying of foreign flags was a treasonous offense.
We will not accept anybody, any individual flying any foreign flag in Nigeria. Also the issue of coups. Nigeria is a sovereign nation. Nigeria is a democratic nation. We will not accept anyone pushing or taking any action, seemingly or for whatever reason, to want to push for any change of government.
Nigeria is currently experiencing its worst cost of living crisis in 3 decades, and people pin the blame on economic reforms they say Western institutions, the World Bank and the IMF, have forced on the country. This includes the removal of a fuel subsidy that has led to a sharp increase in prices.
This government has no listening here. If indeed this government has listening here, this government as of yesterday would not be considering taking another fresh loan from World Bank. You see, this is a terrible government.
The sight of the flags has raised concern here in Nigeria because Russia is deepening security ties with neighboring countries in the region, Burkina Faso, Mali and Niger, where Russian flags have also been seen in anti-government demonstrations and where military leaders have subsequently seized power.
Together with Burkina Faso, the military leaders of Niger and Mali broke away from the regional group in ECOWAS earlier this year, forming a club of their own, which leans towards Moscow, the Alliance of Sahel States. All 3 countries ditched long-standing Western allies after a number of coups. Mali saw 2 recent military takeovers in August 2020 and May 2021. Russian influence was evident even before the coups, like here in 2019. Burkina Faso suffered 2 coups in 2022, the first in January and the second in September. These images are from Ouagadougou. Then in July 2023, Niger's democratically elected president was deposed in a coup, and the country also turned to Russia for its security needs. To help us bring all this together, let's welcome Beverly Ochieng, a security analyst specializing in the Sahel and global power competition in Africa. She joins us from Dakar, Senegal. Hello, Beverly. How big a setback is the battle in northern Mali for Wagner, aka the Africa Corps? They seem to have lost 50 or more fighters. How important is that in the grand scheme of things, both for Russia and Mali?
Well, this has been characterized as one of the biggest military setbacks for the Russian private military contractors who have been operating in Mali for nearly 3 years now, but also in various parts of the region for what will be about half a decade. If you think about their influence in the Central African Republic, in Libya, this is the first time they seem to have had such a mass casualty. Some reports suggest that nearly 80 mercenaries were killed, so-called mercenaries, and they included key leaders of some of the Telegram accounts that they normally run. So it is significant because when you compare about a year ago, or just less than a year ago, the Wagner group, as it was known then, had arrived with the Malian army into the northern town of Kidal in Mali. It was quite a symbolic statement for the military junta because they were now showing that they could have some sense of territorial control. And they've been pushing towards the north with the army for nearly a year now. And this is the first significant loss they've had. So in terms of their coordination and cooperation, it is symbolic for the junta that is looking to show that it has national control over the country.
Right. Just to be clear, I'm calling them Wagner. You try to allude to the fact that that's how they were called. Should we just be saying Russia instead of Wagner?
I mean, the complicated relationship between the Wagner Group and Russia has been something that I've also been looking into over time. So when they initially arrived in the Central African Republic, that was around late 2017, early 2018, the government in CAR, in Bangui, they denied contracting Russian mercenaries. They talked about working with Russian military instructors. At the time, the Wagner Group had sort of gained a reputation from some of the activity that was taking place in Ukraine, the annexation of Crimea, which was said to be done by little green men, who then became the Wagner Group. After the death of the Wagner leader, Prigozhin, who had been the bankroller, he had been a figurehead, he had been quite a key figure in the group. They then subsumed something called the Africa Corps, primarily in the Sahel. So in Mali and some of the ones that have moved into Niger and also Burkina Faso are known as the Africa Corps. The ones in the Central African Republic are still referred to as the Wagner Group, but I think overall the Wagner name has gained quite a reputation in and of itself.
Right. That's an interesting breakdown. Thank you for that. Can you give us an idea of their reach and influence in Mali and indeed the region as a whole?
I mean, so initially they came into the region, starting at CAR as military instructors. They were supposed to be supporting the military take back territory from rebel and armed groups that had destabilized very vast parts of the Central African Republic. This came in coordination with some financial incentives. So it was said that the agreement was that they would have hold of certain mineral areas in exchange for security. They seem to have replicated this model in other parts of the continent where they have been, whether it's Libya, we saw the same thing in the Middle East and Syria. In Mali, even though that hasn't quite been the case, there has been an attempt to take over, whether it's mining initiatives in gold, there's some interest in lithium, and that's in exchange for them to provide security. So it feels as if they pay themselves, or they are paid by the state through those mineral and lucrative mineral holds. Beyond that, they also do have media operations. They have affiliated media operations. Some of them are just online campaigns that go viral, especially during times when they have territorial or battleground wins. These are mostly on Telegram, sometimes on Facebook, sometimes on Twitter. Some are run directly by people who are seen to be Wagner account holders, but some are also by affiliates who would be speaking in French, they would be speaking in Bambara on local radios as a way of also trying to spread that influence on a more local level.
Right. So it begs the question, really, what's in it for them? We're talking about dozens of Wagner forces, if we can continue that trend, being killed, fast forward to today, in northern Mali. So why are they there? What's in it for them? Is it really worth losing their lives over being there?
I suppose if we look at what the commitment by the Russian government will be, then it determines whether they see it to be worth it. After this territorial loss, or this battleground loss, the Malian foreign minister, together with the Russian foreign minister, discussed continued cooperation, because Mali is not just important because of the resources that it has. It's become symbolically important for how Russia can sort of get into this geopolitical war with Western countries. If we're talking about influence, Russian presence in many of these countries has led to a drastic drawdown of Western forces. The last batch of US troops based in Niger left just this week after some protracted negotiations. Part of it was because the US was quite uncomfortable with the relationship between Niger, Russia, as well as Russian allies. Same thing is happening with German forces who might be forced to have to leave their airbase in Niamey. So Russia is looking at this as a geopolitical strategic zone where it can exert some diplomatic dominance, especially given the fact that it has faced so much backlash for its actions in Ukraine, and even for some of what has been perceived by the West as geopolitical tensions and also destabilizing parts of West and Central Africa.
Regarding the recent situation where dozens of Wagner forces were killed, the victors in northern Mali are Tuareg separatists and an Al-Qaeda-linked group. What do we know about them?
So the Al-Qaeda group and the Tuareg separatists, more than a decade ago, had been sort of working together, and they had rebelled against the government in Bamako. It wasn't the first rebellion, but it was the most significant rebellion. That was in 2012. Then they branched out because they had different ideologies. The group that was then part of the MNLA, that was more of the political wing, has now formed what is known as the Permanent Strategic Framework. It's a group of predominantly Tuareg, but also Arab armed groups. They wield a lot of political, social, and military influence in northern Mali. Many of them have been governors or representatives of note in communities in the region. And for them, they have wanted better representation and autonomy of northern Mali, which was part of the reason there was that 2015 agreement when hostilities had initially ceased. Now, the Al-Qaeda group, Jenim, is a more radicalized branch of that, and they have been preaching extremist Islamist ideology. They are not so much interested in being politically engaged, but they're interested in wielding social, economic power in their own way and in imposing Sharia law in areas that they are operating. But over the course of the past year, given that there have been increasing hostilities between the military, the Malian army, and the armed groups in the north, it feels as if there is a silent alliance between the armed groups and the Al-Qaeda group, in that they have been found in similar combat zones. They have been found in areas where either the army has been attacked and they also move in the same area, but they haven't acknowledged working together because it would undermine the permanent strategic framework's political ambitions, because Jenim is a politically and economically and security sanctioned by Western powers and by various other powers. So working together might cause a lot of tension in building the CSP's political legitimacy, not just at home, but also abroad.
Right, right. We will get back to talk about Russia's influence in the region overall. But before that, based on the recent incidents, again, that caused dozens of Wagner forces to lose their lives, Mali has cut diplomatic ties with Ukraine, accusing Kyiv in the strongest of terms of, quote, terrorism. Is Ukraine interfering in Mali's internal affairs, and why would they do that?
So after the battle in Tinzouaten, which is what happened near the border with Algeria, a Ukrainian intelligence official allegedly said that they had provided some information to the Tuareg separatists, which was working together or seemed to be working together with the Al-Qaeda group, which enabled them to raid or to attack the Malian army and the Russian mercenaries. There was a similar video that was shared purportedly by the Ukrainian ambassador, who was based in Dhaka, and Senegal sanctioned them. And as a result of that, there has been quite a diplomatic standoff. So Mali decided to break ranks because being seen to support not just the Tuareg separatists, which Mali has been branding terrorists, but also Jenim, which is an internationally sanctioned terrorist organization, is seen as giving material and logistical support to a terrorist organization, which is why Mali has chosen what it's chosen. But also because Mali does have a close relationship with Russia. And at the moment, Russia and Ukraine have been at war for quite some time. Ukraine is trying to build its diplomatic footprint in the region. And this may have been seen as somewhat something that could undermine the need to get that footprint. But that's how this ended up happening.
Right. It's almost a case of the enemy of my friend is my enemy also, right? Something along those lines. So almost a year ago at the Eastern Economic Forum in Russia, President Vladimir Putin said Moscow had never colonized Africa. What's your view on that, considering that Wagner seems to be the long arm of Russia in the region?
I mean, you will find that the countries that are working together with the Wagner Group will say that they are doing it. So they're working together closely with the Russian government, will say that they are doing it because it is their sovereign choice, because they feel that the other Western partners that they've been working with, whether it's France, whether it's the US, have been an external imposition. And part of it does have to do with legacy, because France's legacy over the years, especially now as Russian influence has been growing, has been called into question. There's a lot of sovereignist movements that are emerging, nationalist sentiment. It does feel like there is still a sense of dependency on Russia, which is what this, fighting in Tinzawaten has demonstrated, and even the past year of Malian military operations. But if you're talking to people who are proponents of the junta administrations, or people who are vocal in their support of Russia, they would argue otherwise, even though it does feel as if Russian dominance is coming at a particular cost, a human cost as well as an economic cost.
Right. Quite an interesting situation there, isn't it? Can I also get your take on events in northern Nigeria? Russian flags being flown at protests, 90 people arrested for carrying Russian flags. Russia's embassy has denied involvement. Do we know why protesters in northern Nigeria would want to make common cause with Putin?
It's not very clear, because the other interesting thing about it was that people were chanting in Hausa, "We want Russia, we want Russia." It feels opportunistic. It is the kind of, I would say, fear-mongering that happened during the protests that broke out in Mali in 2020, where Russian flags were being waved, or even subsequently in Burkina Faso just after the 2 military coups that happened in 2022, or even in Niger in the aftermath of that military coup last year. It feels as if that's how it's building off. Even the tailor was arrested among the 90 people who were. Russian sentiment in northern Nigeria, and even in the parts that border Niger, you wouldn't say that it's particularly strong. There have been some radios where some commentators will speak vocally about Russian presence, particularly in Niger, which obviously, because it's a very close geopolitical zone, there's bound to be some level of influence. How much of it is actually filtering into people's lives that we now see these flags emerging is something worth looking into. But it may feel in some ways opportunistic, because we do know that Wagner Telegram channels took advantage of protests in the Sahel to demonstrate that they also do have influence wider in the region.
Right. Talking about opportunism, coup after coup, old colonialist allies booted out, Russian flags flying across the Sahel. I guess the question is fair to ask, is this all part of a grand strategy or just astute opportunism by Putin?
I mean, it could be both ways, because there are countries that have been intrinsically vulnerable to military coups. Niger had always been a candidate. It had experienced previous coups, and even the president who was deposed, Bazoum, was quite fragile, given the fact that this has happened in Mali, it happened in Burkina Faso, and he was the only president at that point who was welcoming of Western powers. And it also says a lot about the fact that the West cannot necessarily coup-proof a country or a region. There are warning signs when militant attacks increase and there's public disgruntlement over how the government is dealing with it. Sometimes it's external influence and how people respond to those influences. For instance, anger towards French intervention, or not necessarily even anger, but despondency, or a feeling that it wasn't giving the results that it should have. But it would be hard to say if it is all deliberately planned. There are a set of opportunities, instability, political security, which all come together to make a region prone to military coups. And some of the places where it's happened, for instance, Gabon, it hasn't been as acrimonious as with the Sahel. It has been something building for a long time. So I guess for now, people are wondering, where is it likely to happen next?
Right, that's $1 billion question. We don't have the answer now to that. But I've learned a lot from you, Beverly Ochieng, security analyst specializing in the Sahel. Thank you very much.
Thank you as well.